Hi, class. We're going to jump right into talking about working memory. I've posted Peter Doolittle's TED Talk, which will definitely complement this lecture. So, again, we're going to talk about memory. Want you to, in Doolittle's video, as you watch it, also participate in the exercise. And it's the 5-word exercise at about 2 minutes, 29 seconds into the lecture, and want to see how you did with that 5-word exercise, okay? So definitely watch Doolittle's video, which is already posted on Canvas. So as we talk about memory, want to discuss what are some differences that you feel and have seen academically in college versus, say, high school, or if you went to another college. How have your approaches to studying and remembering things differed? How are they similar? What's worked? What hasn't worked? What are some of the pros and cons? So I want you to think of those differences. So for those of you who are new students or might have been away from school for a while, what are some of the strategies you've used to remember things and study, right? So one thing is that you'll see right away is that one in college, with the exception of maybe some English classes and some math classes, your classes don't usually meet every day. They might have less homework worksheets, again, with some exceptions, and you may be assigned more midterms or papers and things like that. So it does take some adjustment. The way you studied in high school may be different in college, or what worked in high school, it might work in college as you go, but you may feel like you need to adjust. And I think that's the key, is being flexible and being able to adapt, right? So what we'll do is talk about memory techniques, because there are situations in college where you have to remember a lot in a short amount of time, right? Or you may have to read a lot and really take in a lot of information in a short amount of time. Okay, so there are 4 basic ways and techniques to kind of help you improve your memory. And I think a lot of them can also be related and applied with the active learning that Peter Doolittle discussed in his TED Talk. But basically, one way to improve your memory is to organize things well. So organize information, notes, handouts, readings to make it easier to find and recall. Using all of your senses. So as Doolittle talked about, using visuals, using sound, senses can help you. And remember, we talked about learning styles and things like that, so knowing the type of learner you are can also help you remember things better and utilizing those strengths, right? Also using your brain, and I'll talk a little bit about what that means. And then, of course, recalling and regularly going back to review information, which Doolittle talked about a little bit too. So we'll start with organizing. You want to be really selective to figure out what is important to learn, right? So one thing you can do is to skim chapters and look for the main points. And we'll talk about this in reading techniques and studying techniques throughout the semester. But being selective and prioritizing what's important, figuring out what the main ideas are and focusing on that, right? And some ways that you can put things together and organize things are, for example, by time, by location. You could alphabetically organize things by category or subject area. So these are just some ways to help you. If things are cluttered and all over the place, it becomes hard to comprehend and memorize. But if you can organize things in a way that makes sense, and again, that could be in a number of different ways, But if you are systematic in the way you do it, for example, if you categorize things by date or alphabetically, and if that's helpful for you, that can help you remember and improve your memory too. All right. What Doolittle talked a lot about is using senses and active learning. So it's important to make sure that you aren't feeling super anxious or stressed, and that you take care of yourself. And I'll highlight self-care a little bit towards the end of the lecture, but really putting yourself in a place where you can learn and be present, right? Active learning, as Doolittle talked about, is really key. So kind of learning in the moment. When you do learn something, really repeating it and reviewing it and really studying it in the moment, instead of procrastinating and trying to learn it later or remember it later as you cram before an exam or something like that. So if you can learn in the moment and actively, that's really key. For us visual learners, having pictures and visuals. For us auditory learners, maybe it's hearing it and recording it. Maybe it's a combination of visual and audio, so you can look at video. For some of us, we remember things by writing them down. So if you've ever seen reruns of the old show, Saved by the Bell, I think there was an episode, I can't remember, I think it was Zach Morris, where there was an exam and he wrote everything on his shoe, but by writing everything down, he actually remembered it on the test, but the teacher ended up seeing he wrote everything on his shoe and thought he cheated. But actually, in that episode, writing things down was really helpful for Zach to remember things. And that's obviously an exaggerated example from a TV show, but it's very real that that may be a way that we can remember things better, is by writing them down. And we're all different in terms of how we learn, right? We also may come into this knowing that maybe we aren't always the best at taking tests or remembering things. So part of this is really helping y'all find different techniques and ways that you can try out to see if those work, and so that you could be successful. All right, so using your brain, what that essentially means is overlearn, right? So don't just take for granted, like, okay, I get it, I know it, that you can overlearn and review more than you need to or think you need to. Overlearning, it's a pretty tried and true technique to really help process and remember things, right? So don't just take, for example, like, okay, I've read it, I know it. It's okay if you already know it to go back and read it again. Also using your brain. Some of us are morning people, some of us are night owls. We may be most productive in a quiet place. Some of us need to have music in the background, but really finding your most productive environment and the time that you function best is an obvious one, but something we often take for granted, right? I know for me, for example, when I was at UC Berkeley as an undergraduate, I had a really hard time studying in my apartment. I would fall asleep, I would talk to my roommates, I would talk to and message friends, but in the library there was no cell reception, and I could really focus and there were less distractions. So that was my productive place and time, right? When it was quiet and no one would study. So I actually learned really well in the evenings, pretty late, when no one would bother me or talk to me. But you could be different. You may be a morning person that likes to get a lot done. So now I feel like I am really productive in the mornings. So that could change for you too. Like as you evolve and your life change, your productivity time could change too. So a lot of this is knowing yourself and exploring yourself in this class, and really understanding when you're most effective. Okay. As we mentioned with other things, it's really important to be an active learner, right? So as things are covered in classes that you take, really take that time to study it and review it, and don't just wait and put it off to study, right? So these are things that cross over with different techniques, but learning actively in the moment, your chances of remembering and memorizing things are going to be much higher than if you try to figure it all out a day or two before an exam. Okay. So the last one I'm going to talk about is recall. Is the last tip, is how do you recall it? Well, it's like a muscle, right? Use it or lose it. So when studying material, it's really important to continue to study it, review it, or you'll forget it, quite frankly. So make sure you use it, make sure you put in practice. For those of you who are athletes or musicians, you know that it takes practice, right? Or if you speak a language or other languages, if you don't use it, you probably lose a little skill. Or if you're a musician and you haven't played in a while, you may lose it, but once you go back into it, then it comes back to you. So really put in that practice as far as studying. Think of studying in school as something that you can practice and that you have to use to retain, right? You also have to have that positive mindset and attitude, because your chances of success are much better with that positive attitude. So instead of thinking negatively, like, I'm never going to remember all of this, really adopt a positive attitude that you will not forget and you will know this, right? And also understand that it's okay to go back and learn stuff again, right? Those are great ways to recall things. So you may have gone through materials before or have taken something similar in other classes. It's okay to relearn, and relearning is a great way to memorize.